Good morning, everyone. Let's begin with a chant today. This chant is called, Where is There Love? And the lyrics are, In this world, Mother, no one can love me. In this world, they do not know how to love me. Where is there pure loving love? Where is there truly loving me? There my soul longs to be. As we chant, let's hold that vibration of longing and of yearning to know Divine Mother, to introduce ourselves to that consciousness of divinity that lives beyond this material world, that lives beyond the chaos and the ups and downs and the roller coasters of what it means to live in this ego consciousness. begin with a prayer. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and our beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda. Humbly we bow at thy feet. Divine Mother, help us to transform our consciousness, that we may live beyond the identities of this material plane, that we may open our hearts to your divine consciousness, that we may find that place of stillness, living in your love, in your light, and that we may share that light with all. Om. Peace. Amen. Good morning, everyone. I was joking with my friend Keshava, who is here behind the camera with us today, about the topic for today, and my disclaimer that I am a complete novice in this topic of entropy, which deals with physics. But the backstory is I'm reading a novel right now. It's a fiction novel, and it isn't about physics or really science at all. It's set in Europe in the 1940s during World War II. But this phrase for one of the main characters keeps coming up throughout the story, and I'm only halfway through the novel, so I don't know why or where we're going with it yet. But it's the second law of thermodynamics, which states that in a closed system, entropy can never decrease. And for some reason, I've read it 2 or 3 times now throughout the course of this novel that I'm reading, and it stuck with me in a way that I thought, I need to explore this and talk about this and share this a little, knowing that at the moment I actually had to look up what entropy was because I didn't even know what entropy was, and the joke was on me because as soon as I read the definition, I still didn't understand it. In fact, I think I understood it less. So I'm going to do my best. We're going to begin today with a brief physics lesson. And my disclaimer is I don't actually have any idea what I'm talking about, but I feel so engaged and excited about this idea. And so the way that we're going to interpret this second law of thermodynamics is through the understanding that I have and the ways that I was spiritualizing it. But for all of you physicists out there, many of whom I know are in Ananda, I know many physicists and people who are studying it, and then anyone else who's joining us, I might be completely wrong, and I'm sorry, and I welcome you to come and correct me and help me to understand it more. But this is the kindergarten version of the second law of thermodynamics today. So the first law of thermodynamics is a well-known law. It's the one that most of us know and that we've cited often on this path when we're sharing the teachings of Yogananda, because energy is such a core principle of these teachings and of what Yogananda has brought to us in terms of working with the yogic path and transforming our consciousness. So the first law of thermodynamics states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed. And the second law, as I've said, states that in a closed system, entropy can never decrease. Now, entropy is the state of randomness that occurs within any sort of system. So if we're looking at it in terms of a molecular system, this is what I learned on Khan Academy last night. If you have a block of ice and it's frozen solid, and that block of the molecules in that block of ice, they're ordered and they're contracted and they're very firm, right? And that's what's holding that block of ice in its solid state. And I believe that as soon as we introduce that energy into that system, which in this case the energy of heat, suddenly those molecules begin to vibrate and move around with the introduction, and they're working with that energy, and they're changing and transforming, and they become more chaotic, more randomized. And so when you have this closed system where you've introduced energy into it, the molecules are changing and moving around, and they become randomized. So they're no longer in that constricted, ordered form as a block of ice. And what do they become? Well, they become a puddle of water. And if we allow that energy to keep working in that system, it becomes steam, which is an even more randomized state. So we're going from solid to liquid to steam. It's becoming more and more randomized and chaotic. And what I can understand is that we live in this universe, and the way the physicists view this universe is that it is a closed system. And so the theory being that there isn't any new energy being introduced into this system that is the universe, because it's making up everything that, everything around us, and the molecules and energy are working with it within this closed system that we have. And so there is the theory that perhaps the universe is progressing more and more toward a randomized state, which of course can lead the discerning or the intellectual mind, can't think of the word, the scrupulous mind, to start to think, well, if the universe is just headed towards a more random and chaotic state, then is there meaning to it? Are we just floating out there freely without any meaning, without any purpose? Is this universe in itself just randomized and meaningless? And of course, as yogis, as spiritual seekers who are working to introduce the divine into our lives, we know that that's not true. But as I thought about it, and again, that's where my disclaimer comes in, that's a very limited understanding of entropy, and I know that, but that's the thread that I wanted to pick it up from today to talk about it in a spiritual sense. As I was thinking about this idea that the universe could potentially be seen as random, as chaotic, as meaningless, and that though we as spiritual seekers, we know that's not true, so often it appears to us to be that way, doesn't it? And we get caught up in our ego's emotions, and whether it's pain, whether it's loneliness, whether it's confusion, fear, whatever it may be, suddenly that veil descends, and what we see on the other side is a lack of purpose, a lack of fear, or not a lack of fear, an introduction of fear. What we see is this idea. It forces us to question, what am I doing? Why is this happening to me? Where are we headed with all of this? And the more chaotic or the more troubling the circumstances may be, the more that we can feel that sense of loneliness. I thought about, so many of us have heard the recordings of Paramahansa Yogananda. There are a few recordings out there of talks that he's given, and in one he's talking about Antony of the desert, and who is being tempted by the satanic forces, and he says when Christ appears to him, he says, "Why did you leave me?" And I can still hear Yogananda's voice. He says, "Antony," he's quoting Christ, "Antony, always the same I was with you." The divine energy never leaves us, and it's only that veil between what our soul knows to be true and what our ego is discerning and thinking in the world that causes us to feel that we are separate, that we are alone, that we don't have that support and that divine guidance, which is why I chose this chant to sing at the beginning. Again, I was joking with Keshava before we started. This is a bit of a heavy chant if you just look at it at surface value. In this world, Mother, no one can love me. In this world, they do not know how to love me. It can feel so lonely. Again, crying out, where is their pure loving love? Where is their truly loving thee? There my soul longs to be. It can feel like that cry of loneliness that so often we are confronted with when that veil has descended for each one of us. But underneath that is the joy and the yearning. There my soul longs to be. It's the affirmation that that divine energy and that divine consciousness is always right there, that no matter how random or chaotic or lonely the world may seem, right there in the midst of it, just as Paramahansa Yogananda quotes Christ to Saint Anthony, "Always the same I was with you." Or we have that beautiful poem or story of footsteps that is a beautiful, famous story in the Christian tradition, where a man is walking along the beach and he sees two sets of footsteps, one for himself and one for Christ. And then in the hardest times of his life, there's only one set of footsteps, and he asks Christ, "Why did you leave me in those moments?" And Christ says, "No, those are the moments when I picked you up and I was carrying you." And as I was thinking about this idea of that fear and that pain and that loneliness that comes when we feel confronted by a random universe, by the randomized state or chaotic state of our world, of our society, I just kept thinking about how thin that veil actually is. And that if we can just raise our energy a little bit more, we can find those moments when the divine is guiding us in every step. I have a few stories to share. Today's mostly just storytelling because I didn't know how to conclude this topic of entropy because I didn't quite totally understand all of it and I didn't want to be completely off in it. So I thought we would just tell stories about this idea of what it means to confront that sense of that sense of chaos or sense of randomness. But how the divine is actually there waiting for us in those midst. And the first story is one from my life when I was studying abroad. I spent a semester in Austria, and during that time I spent a week in Spain with a few of my friends. And it feels very mundane until we get to the end, but the entire trip was just a comedy of somewhat serious errors throughout the course of it. Everything that could go wrong on the mundane level, so nothing tragic was happening, but everything that could go wrong was going wrong. On the second night, my wallet was stolen. On the third night, we checked into a new hostel and a pipe broke and the entire hostel was flooded, but we couldn't get a hold of anyone, so we were just in this space with water flooding everywhere and people running around speaking Spanish that we didn't really know how to communicate with. My other friend broke her camera, just one thing after another, all of these little mundane things. And by day 5 of the trip, I had had enough. It was just too much, so I decided I was going to end. We were supposed to be there for 7 days and then return to Austria where we were staying. And I told my friends, I said, I have to go home. So I didn't have any money, but I still had my Euro-rail. So I had my train ticket that I could travel freely throughout Europe. And so I went down, my friends loaned me some money to get home, and myself and 2 others decided that we wanted to go home early. And we did, and so I went up to the man and in my best broken Spanish tried to explain to him that I would like to get from Barcelona, where I was, to Salzburg, Austria, where I needed to go. And he just said, no trains for 2 weeks. And I just kept looking at him and saying, no, I need to get to Austria. And he said, no trains for 2 weeks. And I just burst into tears, and I didn't know what else to do, and it had all just compiled. And he looked a little bit frightened and scared, and he had just this tender fatherly love in his voice. And he goes, 1 minute, and he walked away, and he came back with this map, this maze of take this train to 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 this train, and then you'll get to Austria. And I realized what he'd meant is there were no direct trains from Barcelona to Austria for 2 weeks, but he could get me there. And it was that in that moment, I didn't know, I don't like to cry. And so I was feeling a little embarrassed about that. But in that moment, it was just the sweetness and the tenderness of this man and his ability to go back through all of the miscommunications and the translations and the emotion that I was bringing to it. It was such a sweet moment of divine love, and I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't on this path. I didn't really have a context for what divine love could mean in my life, but it was such a touching and beautiful moment just in the midst of one chaotic thing after another, and it didn't even end there. As soon as we got on our train and we had all of our tickets, I actually got kicked just for Divine Mother's fun. She kicked me out of my seat. And I had to sleep in like the cargo train. And so it was just one more little laugh that Divine Mother could have. And the whole time I kept thinking, this is going to make a great story someday. But just in the midst of all of that chaos, the reason this story came to me is because it was just chaotic moment after chaotic moment, and fear and confusion and anger and pain. And I was feeling so forsaken and alone. Again, those are not the words I would have used at that time, but just that feeling of there's no one and nothing out there looking out for me. One more thing could go wrong. Here it is. I can't get home. I'm stuck here. And then Divine Mother sends a little angel, and I called him my little train angel, for the rest of that trip, because that's exactly what it felt like. Just like Yogananda quoting Christ to Antony in the story of Antony, always the same I was with you. When your wallet was stolen, when the pipes were broken and you were standing in 2 feet of water, when you were lost in Barcelona with your friends, whatever it may be, just one thing after another, through all of those comedies of errors, always the same I was with you. And when you needed me the most, there I was, and I sent someone to show you and to love you and to help you find your way home. Isn't that what the Guru is always doing? Isn't that what Divine Mother is always doing? That veil is so thin, and the more agitated and confused and scared I was getting through that trip and through those comedies, that comedy of errors one after another, the less I was able to get still and to feel that. And again, at the time, I wasn't on the path, and I wouldn't have had these teachings to rely on to help me with that. But now I do, and now we can navigate them in that way. And we can say, when everything seems to be going wrong and I feel most alone, that's the moment to stop and to say, no, you're right here. It's that veil. All I need to do is move it aside. All I need to do is feel to the other side. Just as Yogananda always tells us, Divine Mother's love, her energy is always flowing to us. All we need to do is open ourselves to it in order to receive it. Just like the example he uses, a teacup cannot hold the whole ocean. The teacup must learn to expand. And that expansion, where I came back to entropy with it, or rather, let's just talk about molecules. When you're that block of ice and everything is confined and constricted and those molecules are lined up perfectly one after another, here we are, we're constricted, we're confined, we're tense. Do we want to be that block of ice, or would we rather embrace that randomness of the liquid state or the steam state? Because in the randomness, in all of that space that's created, there's room for Divine Mother to come in and to be dancing through that experience with us. In those chaotic moments, there's more space for us to be open and to receive Divine Mother's love. And that, of course, is the beauty of opening up and feeling her grace, of practicing when it's easy for those moments of divine love. It's all about our ability to open up and to feel them. So randomness is something that we can absolutely embrace and love. It doesn't have to mean that we're headed towards meaninglessness. It can mean that we're headed towards a deeper and more intimate relationship with the divine, because we're allowing that space for her to be a part of those moments with us. Another example of this, when I had just graduated from college and I'd gotten my teaching credential. This was in about 2009, and so we were in the middle of what was the recession at that point. And teaching jobs were very difficult to find. And so I had done everything right in my life up until that point. I went to high school, I studied really hard, took all the right classes, went to a good college, graduated from college, got my teaching credential. Everything was just lined up the way it should be. My resume read the way it should. But there just weren't jobs because teachers were being laid off right and left. And I remember communicating that and speaking to my family about it. My family very nervous and afraid that I wasn't finding a job. I'd spent the whole summer looking for a teaching job. And it was August at this point, and I still couldn't find a job, and I was starting to make plans for other options, where I would live, who I could move in with, my sister, my parents, and just waiting out the storm until I could find a teaching job. And one night I got into a huge fight with my parents about it, and my parents just feeling like I wasn't putting out enough energy, that I was just being lazy, and that's why I couldn't find a job. And I got so angry. I was staying at my sister's house at that time, and I just handed the phone in the middle of the conversation to my sister, and I said, I'm leaving. And I just went out and went for a walk, and I was frustrated and angry and crying and cursing the universe or whatever it was that I was doing in that moment. And as I walked for about 2 hours, and as I walked, the tears I found in the midst of that, the tears and the anger, at one point they just completely transformed into utter joy, and I was laughing and laughing, and I couldn't find a source for that laughing. I couldn't find a reason to be happy. There wasn't anything that I could attach it to. I couldn't even find it within myself. Again, both of these stories happened before I was introduced to the path, so I didn't have the context for what it meant that joy just existed within you, and that when that veil can be pushed aside, that there it is, there's the divine, and that joy bubbles up within us. But I remember I came home at it was probably about 11 o'clock by that point. My sister was waiting up for me. She said, "Are you okay?" And I was just laughing and laughing, and I said, "I feel fantastic." I said, "Everything is going to be absolutely fine." And I didn't understand it. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what the fine was going to be, but I knew everything was okay, and I knew everything was going to be okay. And it took another 1.5 years before Yogananda brought me up here and brought me to Ananda. But in that moment, when I reflect back, though I didn't know it at the time, that's what that energy was. That's what that joy was. So that you can say, right now it looks random, it looks confusing. You're on the precipice of what the world is telling you you're doing everything wrong, or what the world is telling you you're not being successful, but you just wait, because what's happening for you, I'm here, I'm holding you, and I'm carrying you to where you need to be, and just have faith and sit in that and just take the steps one by one until we can meet here. Again, for me, what that was coming to Ananda. And we don't have time today, but sometime I'll share my story of coming to Ananda, which was filled with just as much chaos and randomness. But that's the reflection. I hope it's coming through in these stories that I'm sharing. When we feel most alone, or when we feel most in a state of randomness and confusion, those are the moments to look for the divine, because she's right there. She's right there holding us, and that energy that can flow in when we're open to receiving it. And sometimes, as was the case for me, even when I didn't know I was ready to receive it, or didn't know what it meant to open up to receive it, when I needed it most, there it was. There was that joy. There was that angel with a ticket helping me to find my way home, just like the guru. When we're most confused, when we feel most alone, which we can so easily trick ourselves into feeling. Isn't it so easy to say, nobody understands, nobody sees, nobody cares? It's not the truth. The divine is right there holding each one of us. In this world, Mother, no one can love me. If I look at this world with the eyes of my ego consciousness, that's what I see. Chaos and confusion, and one obstacle after another. But if we can take off those glasses of ego consciousness and feel with receptivity and with openness that flow of divine energy, it's not a closed system any longer. To come all the way back to our second law of thermodynamics, in a closed system, entropy, or the capacity for randomness, can never decrease. Well, don't be that closed system. Open yourself up to the divine. Be that teacup that can expand out to hold the entire ocean. Then that ability, that capacity for order, for understanding, which is actually our capacity to move closer to that state of oneness, of perfect divine consciousness, of understanding self-realization, then we're completely open to it. We are not closed systems. Our ego may trick us into thinking we are, but we are not, and that energy of the divine is flowing in, and it's ever renewing within us. All we need to do is open ourselves to it. This morning, Swami Jyotish, who is the spiritual director of Ananda worldwide, every 2 weeks, he and his wife Devi, they offer a bi-weekly blog, just sweet little stories with spiritual lessons in them. And today's blog, which came out, was talking about the enlightenment of the Buddha, and how on the day that the Buddha became enlightened, there was a wave of divine consciousness that was spread out across the world, and everyone could feel that upliftment. And he tells just a series of sweet stories of people who awakened to that consciousness. A man who was kind of swindling and cheating, rupee by rupee, being able to stuff it away and to save it, and suddenly becomes more gregarious and wants to share rather than to keep for himself. A leopard who is stalking a fawn and is about to pounce on the fawn, and then is awakened to that motherly love when she sees the tear in the baby fawn's eyes, and she licks the wounds and sends the fawn on its way. So just these sweet stories of what it means to open up to compassion. And he ends his blog with this paragraph, which felt so perfectly aligned with what we're talking about today. Who knows if even today, confused and defiant though people are, a wave of enlightenment may chance to come again. The open hearts will sense its arrival. That ability to awaken, to feel Divine Mother's love, that wave of enlightenment that he's referencing when Jyotish is telling the stories of the Buddha, it's always present for us. And it can come again. And the defiance and the chaos of the world, that veil can confuse us. All we need to do is open our hearts to it. All we need to do is be that teacup that can expand out and to feel Divine Mother's love. It's so simple. Remember in every moment, no matter what emotion you're feeling, loneliness, fear, grief, confusion, right there in the midst of it, the Divine Mother is standing with us, and she will never leave us alone. God bless you.